clear decisions in terms of coming up with climate change solutions. Thank you.
If Mayor Modise can respond to the two questions, please.
Thank you very much, Premier, and thank you for the question. Yeah, so firstly on the alignment issue, so on the commission composition already includes, as I've mentioned, local government, SALGA. So there's two mayors that have been appointed by SALGA to serve on the commission. So that's the link with organized local government. There is no formal link with provincial councils, but however, once, because provinces are now still busy following the Climate Act, establishing the councils, then my role as head of secretariat would be to link up with secretariats of the different provincial councils or premiers councils for climate change. I know Gauteng already has one, to then ensure that we are all aligned in terms of the work that we do. We then also, it's not just that, so that is just the formal kind of structure. But then there are key interventions in priority areas. So, for example, already in Emalahleni, obviously we started with Mpumalanga, given the power stations and all of that. There's also some work happening in the Eastern Cape with the automotive space. There's also work happening around the Durban South Basin. So what we do from our side, we would have identified priority areas on key interventions, and with that, there is that direct coordination with key officials or even be it city managers in the different cities in getting the work done. But however, it would help once the commissions are in place, it would help to coordinate, because then it's not like an intergovernmental process where we have to go through the hierarchy of government to get that work done, especially in the monitoring of the work that needs to happen. From a data accessibility perspective, I mean, I do get your point. We've also seen it as a critical issue on the research that we do. As the PCC, we do our best to, whenever we issue key policy recommendations, technical reports, advisories, they are all on the website. But what we realized of late is that, websites are not easily accessible. So we have succeeded now in we are getting our website to be zero rated, which means anybody without, without data, airtime, you can access the website. So it's zero rated, it's freely accessible, such that people can download the information that we would have done. So what we haven't done yet is to do a bit of a to and froing, wherein you as an organization would then come to us and say, but here is an information gap that we need to address. Can we work with you? Can you help us? If we've already prioritized the area, then we work on it, because we are partnering with key research institutions. We do want to work with actually all universities. So we are now moving, we are already working with UKZN, for example, on some of the adaptation and resilience work, because there is so much that needs to be done from an information generation perspective. And our belief is that information has to be generated locally. We can't continue, especially on climate science, we can't be relying on overseas information or one or two academic institutions. And the great part is that there is this body of knowledge that's being created, where now universities are partnering with each other, and we are doing joint research all together rather than one working alone. So it's just a matter of us making sure that the information reaches everyone, even communities, so that they know when there are questions where to go to get it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Modise. We really appreciate your presentation and the responses to the question. They are going to assist us a great deal as we try to navigate on a strategy that will be friendly to KZN, that will involve everyone in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, right from the grassroots, so that they participate either in awareness programs or some actions to be implemented in cooperation with all the stakeholders that we have in our province, including Ondabezitha, Amakhosi and Izinduna. Including also the traditional healers, because they also have a role to play when they have a correct understanding of what is happening. So we really thank you for the presentation. The next presentation is going to be made by Dr. Matlane from the CSIR. I'm not quite sure whether he's present or is present. Over to you, sir. Table there, or you'll go to that desk for presentations.
How do I drive it?
On the laptop.
Good morning, everyone. I now have left my notes where I was seated. But no, it's fine. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the Premier. I want to acknowledge the honorable MECs that are here, the mayors, and the traditional leadership that we have here. My name is Brian. I lead the work of climate change and equality at the CSIR. I do also recognize that there are DDGs present here and chief directors, and I acknowledge their presence. I'm going to be brief. Thank you. I'm going to be brief. I've prepared about 19 slides. I've been asked to talk about the science of climate change. I'm going to try to deliver that input in about 15 minutes. So I've got 3 key topics that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to look back and talk about the history of climate science, and just give you a sense of what the information that we have about the scope, not the scale, but the scope of natural disasters, first globally and then secondly locally here in South Africa. Then I'm going to close with what can be done. The history of climate change science is pretty similar to that of evolution. We all would remember how Darwin came up with his theory of evolution. And at the beginning, the notion of climate science started as a theoretical concept, largely as an academic concept. But with time, there was a recognition that there is a link between the increasing greenhouse gas emissions and the increasing global air temperatures. But early on, this was seen, as I said, academic, and most importantly, it was seen as a future issue, that no, Yes, we see there's this kind of correlation, but it's not an issue for today. At the time, there were lots of questions about, is climate change really occurring? When will it manifest? How will it manifest? Who's going to be impacted? Remember, at the heart of man is man himself. So the question is, does it matter for me? And the big question was, whose problem is it? The challenge about climate change is that, well, the causes thereof. Even if today we'll switch off greenhouse gas emissions, it's impossible, but let's just assume theoretically it would happen. There is still enough energy in the system to drive the impacts over time. So let me put it differently to understand this issue of tragedy of commons. Even if one country, say Sweden, decides to actively have ambitious climate actions and decrease emissions to close to zero, very difficult. If the countries next door are not doing that, are continuing with business as usual, the impact of that one country will be diluted. And that's what makes climate change a challenge, is that it has to be done by everyone. It's a tragedy of commons. This slide is one of the most famous slides in climate science. At the bottom, it shows the years. On the y-axis, it shows the carbon dioxide concentrations. When you step outside, going to your car today, there's CO2 that you are using. Outside, not here in the room, outside, currently the CO2 concentrations are around 423 ppm today. When I was doing my PhD in 2001, 2002, outside atmospheric concentrations were 380, 381. In about 20 years, they've shifted from 381, 382 to 420, 421. And that's just practically, it's something that we can measure. And that is why, in my view, climate science has proven beyond doubt that indeed atmospheric concentrations of CO2 are increasing. So basically this slide was just showing that it was picking up that there's a clear signal that CO2 is increasing over time. So what do we say today? We now know that indeed emissions are increasing. We know that temperatures are increasing. So the questions we're asking ourselves is, how is climate change manifesting? How is climate change showing? How is it manifesting itself? And where? I just want to, the third bullet point is a little bit, let me just talk to it a little bit. Climate change was often discussed as a global average phenomenon. Now, the challenge about using averages is that climate change does not manifest as an average. You know, an average is made up of data points along the line or along the curve, irrespective of what is the nature of the curve. But climate is made up of weather. Today's weather, just as you look outside, in 10 years' time, it will be climate. So that's what makes up climate. So climate does not change on averages because weather doesn't change on averages. It changes depending where you are and what season you are at. As such, today, the manifestation of climate change is on increased weather and seasonal variability. I want to say that again. The manifestation of climate change today is on the increased variability of seasonality. What we used to experience in a particular season, we are seeing more of it in a different season. and that has material implications for different sectors of the economy. We are used to storms, we are used to droughts, and that is a fact. But what we are seeing is that we are seeing more of these things happening frequently. The strength of the floods that we are having is unprecedented. The duration of extreme weather events, occurrence, yes, we've seen them before, but the duration is reaching new levels. I've talked about aseasonality. Aseasonality refers to climate or not, to weather patterns that are found in seasons that are traditionally not expected. So why does this all matter? It matters because these changes affect us, no matter who you are. So here I'm showing, perhaps let me start by this. This is a global picture of extreme weather events. And if you look at the second one, the one that says ECWE, that's extreme climate weather events, you look on the right-hand side of that graph, you can see there are more of these extreme climate weather events appearing. On the x-axis is time, on the y-axis is the scale and the occurrence. And you can see that over time, the extreme weather events, this is a global trend, are becoming frequent. They are becoming bigger, they are taking place for a longer period of time. That's global. Now, if you look at South Africa, in the last 40 years or so, a paper by Mary Jane Bopape recently showed the occurrence of these extreme weather events over time, from 1980 to 2023. And you can see that we've had floods, a large number of them. This is a busy slide, but I decided to put it in. What it attempts to do is to show the disasters that have happened in South Africa per year. So in the x-axis at the bottom, you see the time. On the y-axis on the left is the number of these events. And if you look at the time, you go to from 1980 to 2023, these events become, these bars become longer. And they show that that's a sign of the frequency of these, what we call hydrometeorological disasters. And this is in South Africa. Another similar study looked only at floods, just the floods only, over time. Starting in 1920 all the way to 2023. And it's very clear that there's an increase in the frequency, in the occurrence of these events as we move closer to where we are today. This is another busy slide. I was hesitant to include it, Chair, but I decided to include it because in KZN, we spend a lot of time talking about disasters caused by floods or droughts. There's a silent issue of heat. This part of the country has high occurrence of heat waves. And I asked my team to look at the heat waves between a livelihood, a livestock signal. So what can be done? I'm concluding, Chair. What can be done? And there's a lot that this province has done. In this slide, I am showing some of the work that has been done. This is not everything that's been done in this province. There's a local, Ulundi local municipality climate change strategy. KwaDukuza, the eThekwini Metro has done different kinds of studies. COGTA, as the department, has done a number of studies. So by this point, what I'm showing is there is work that's being done on climate change in the province. I just need to remove this. I think it's important to acknowledge that. I think it's important to acknowledge that there is extensive there is investment in climate change action in the province. But I want to conclude with these 2 slides. Firstly, I just want to remind us that it's important that we demystify climate change work as an environmental work. It is more than that. It is a human survival issue. Secondly, we put a lot of emphasis for many reasons on mitigating climate change, which is about reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, and that is very important. However, we are realizing that our efforts in mitigating climate change are not concomitant with what is already happening because of climate change. And therefore, adaptation, or I heard this morning the term resilience. I like that phrase better. But I chose adaptation for this presentation. Technically, there are different issues, but my point is adaptation should not be an option, especially for our country, especially for this province. But there's something, Chair, that I want to mention is about adaptation has always been about small projects, 6-month project, 1 million rand to do X, Y, Z. And that's what I call incremental fixes, and that is not the solution. If I had time, I would talk a little bit more about that. But to me, adaptation is about redesigning our infrastructure. As I was driving here from where I'm staying to here, I saw that they are close to Durban. And I was asking myself, wow, that's nice, but is this infrastructure climate resilient? And I'm sure it is, because it's done in 2025. Redesigning our economies. In part, what that means is clarity on investments, making climate-safe investments. So for me, there needs to be a mind shift in how we are thinking about what do we do about climate change. Last slide, what can be done? Locally led work, locally led adaptation, community-led adaptation. I don't want to say this in English. See, Jongela ezantsi the issue of locally led adaptation, and it's so critical. And the issue, I want to link the point 1 and point 2. Normally, when we say locally led, we normally think about villages. And I think we need to shift our mindset to talk about scale. And whatever we're doing, we try to scale it up. Clarity of prioritization. Give you a practical example of clarity of prioritization. If I could ask 2 or 3 people now and say, what are KZN's 3 priorities on climate adaptation? I would get 9 different answers. So it's important, and that's not relation. I would get, and that's not wrong. That's not clarity on what is prioritized, because usually what is prioritized, communicated, gets funded and gets acted upon. And you can measure over time, how far have we done? So to me, clarity of prioritization is critical. Alignment. A persistent challenge with our climate change work, I feel like I'm taking too much time, so I need to stop. A persistent challenge with climate change is aligning climate actions with development. And to me, that's critical. Alignment is there's that aspect of aligning it with developmental actions, but also there's an internal alignment of climate actions. In climate speak, it's called mainstreaming. It's aligning climate actions with what already is being done by government or by business. Let me give you a practical example. Every time I try to work with public sector, I try to speak with the CFOs and tell them about climate change, so that they are aware that as they make investment decisions, which is my last point, they must factor in climate resilience. It must not be a by the way. Let me give you another example of what I mean. For those of us that are like myself, spend enough time looking for funding externally. Externally means outside the country. You'll pick up that most funders are insisting ukuthi you must have gender representation, gender focus in your project. And they have ways of measuring it. And now we are forced as people that are looking for money internationally to do work to respond to that criteria that they've set up. I'm using that as an example of saying, if something is prioritized, if we say climate change considerations must be aligned and mainstreamed across government work, irrespective of what department you're working in, and we measure it and monitor it over time, that would be an amazing start. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Matlana. I know that the next presenter on the agents of climate change action is DNP and Airwalk Africa. Over to you, Dr. Mambo.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just load my presentation. Okay. While I'm doing that, I would also like to acknowledge the Premier and traditional leadership, the DDGs, or I can just say all protocols reserved. I'd like to also thank you for the opportunity to be part of this very key dialogue as we are preparing for the summit. Can people see my screen?
Yes, we do see the screen.
Thank you so much. So I am honored to be coming to be presenting at this time because I am going to build upon what Ms. Modise has spoken about, especially in terms of the priorities, and also what Dr. Matlala has said in terms of what we are facing as a country. I have got a lot of slides, but I have no fear because most of those slides are really meant to provide information. When I chatted to Dr. Fikile, she said that, you know what, they want something comprehensive, something that people can take to their offices, sit down and learn. So why KZN? I think Dr. Matlala has already mentioned it, and Ms. Modise has also highlighted that KZN faces a convergence of climate threats, from rising heat, erratic rainfall, worsening floods and coastal erosion, to stressed ecosystems and fragile infrastructure. So these challenges are amplified or are made worse by social and urban vulnerabilities that we find within our communities, things like poverty, things like inequality. Those things worsened or may amplify the impacts of climate change. For provinces like KZN, we also have high concentrations of people and assets in eThekwini and in coastal towns. As already been alluded, coastal towns are also very vulnerable. We have climate-sensitive sectors such as water, agriculture. When we talk of agriculture, we're talking about sugarcane, about horticulture, about livestock. We're talking about tourism. We're talking about ports and logistics. We also have existing policy momentum within the municipal climate change strategies and disaster risk reduction plans. So why is this important? Focus on KZN, the new one?
No.
Okay. Let me just stop sharing and reshare and see if I can. Alternatively, I know that the presentation is already there in KZN. Maybe they can plug it for me, and I will just talk to it from there, if it's possible, to avoid delays.
Can someone assist? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I see my presentation on the screen. Oh, it's been removed. I thought I saw it on the screen just a few minutes ago. I'll just wait for somebody to light it for me. Okay, can you see the slide that says why focus on KZN? Hello?
No. Still
Okay, let me
frequent.
just,
Yes. Now, why focus on KZN is reflecting.
okay. Let me just, yeah, okay,
Oh,
thank you.
yes.
Let me just focus on this one. So, my apologies about that. I'm using somebody else's laptop. So why focus on KZN? So I was just explaining about the position of KZN, that it's a convergence of different climate threats, from rising heat, erratic rainfall, worsening floods, and coastal erosion, and how these are amplified by social and urban vulnerabilities, not just urban, but also rural vulnerabilities and coastal vulnerabilities. And the high concentration of people and assets in KZN and in the coastal towns, and the climate sensitive sectors such as water, agriculture. For agriculture, we're looking at sugarcane, horticulture, livestock, tourism, ports, and logistics. Okay, do you see this new slide, frequent and intensifying storms, floods and storms?
No. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so let me continue. So I was highlighting that this slide is the reason why we are here, is the reason why we need this summit, because this slide highlights the detrimental impact of climate change. As Dr. Matlala already highlighted, that these episodes are going to get more intense, they're going to become more frequent. So you're looking, for example, in April 2022, those figures you see are going to get higher. Mortality is going to get higher. And we need to prepare, and we need to do as much as we can to make sure that we mitigate these impacts across the province. So urbanization without adequate planning, combined with poor drainage, waste blockage, and informal settlements in high-risk zones, all amplify the impacts of these disasters because of their not only just unpreparedness, but also because of lack of resources to cope to or to be resilient to these impacts. So climate change is estimated to have doubled the probability of such extreme events, increasing by their intensity by of about 4 to 8%. So I've just got a slide that is sort of summarizing some of the impacts of climate change. So where we have rising temperatures and evaporation, what are the impacts of that kind of change? So it threatens water and food security. It worsens drought conditions. Rainfall vulnerability and intense storms lead to frequent floods, urban flooding exacerbated by poor infrastructure. Coastal erosion and sea level rise, coastal zones are affected, and tourism. Infrastructure is under threat. Ecosystems and farming distress, crop yields are declining, agrosystems are degraded, biodiversity is under pressure. And when we highlight the pressure under biodiversity under pressure, we are also looking at habitats for animals. We are looking at ecosystem services that these ecosystems provide are all also under threat. Infrastructure and urban planning, informal settlements and inadequate drainage elevate disaster risk. Adaptation and community resilience, we need new councils and river management plans. Some of the plans, some of the needs have already been highlighted by Ms. Modise as well as Dr. Matla. So we are looking at vulnerable mapping. What vulnerable mapping does is that it highlights the hotspots and the drivers in each area. It is important to note that vulnerability affects different places and different people in different ways. So it's not a one size fits all. So we might have different communities all along the coast of KZN, but their vulnerabilities are different. They are influenced by spatial areas, by socioeconomic factors, by population factors. So illustrating issues of hotspots, these are the ones that have been identified within KZN. Coastal low-lying areas that would be subjected to flood, storm surge, and exposure. Informal settlements on steep slope and floodplains. Drought-affected interior districts with limited water storage. So when we talk about KZN, most of the focus on KZN has been on coastal areas. It has been on the urban areas. But we should also acknowledge that we have those interior districts that have got a different kind of impact or a different kind of vulnerability to drought. So KZN needs to also take that into account. We've got hotspots in dense urban cores with low tree cover, and we've got critical infrastructure corridors near rivers and the coast. I remember when I worked for the CSIR, we did a study looking at the urban heat island effect within eThekwini, looking at what are the hotspots of urban heat island and how can these be mitigated. So those are some of the studies that have been done. I would just like to mention that actually eThekwini has been very instrumental and was one of the front runners in terms of developing climate strategies, doing research on climate. So as a resource for them for the province, you have a lot of information available. So the key drivers of vulnerability are settlement patterns in high-risk zones, inadequate drainage, aging or undersized infrastructure, maintenance backlogs. In terms of aging and undersized infrastructure, I would just like to highlight that the infrastructure that we have now has not accommodated the growth in population. So most of the coastal towns have seen a massive growth in population, and the infrastructure that's available is not able to cope with the number of people that are now dependent upon it. So you find that there is a need not only to upgrade infrastructure to cater for the new numbers of population. Livelihood dependent on climate sensitive sectors such as agriculture, and then household poverty and limited insurance or financial buffers. Financial buffers are what the government would do when there is a disaster. How do they come in? How do they assist? When you look at insurance, it's for communal farmers. We know that most commercial farmers have already insured their produce. But what about our small-scale farmers, and what about our subsistence farmers or rural farmers? How can they have access to that kind of insurance? Socio-economic impacts. What climate risks mean for people, sectors, and the economy? So we have what we call cross-cutting socio-economic impacts. These are impacts that cut across all different sectors, socio-economic and environment. Things like household welfare, income shocks, food prices, service disruptions. These are things that affect households on a day-to-day. Public health, heat stress, vector and waterborne diseases. These put pressure on health systems that are already under pressure from other things. So as we see, as heat stress increases, as vector and waterborne diseases increase because of climate change, they will put more pressure on the health systems in the province. Infrastructure, roads, bridges, stormwater, electricity, water systems, all these are cross-cutting because any one of them that are affected, they do not only affect government, they affect the economy, they affect the companies, the industries, people. Where the bridges are washed away, communities are isolated. So infrastructure is also very important. Ecosystems and services, we assist in erosion control, water regulation, and coastal buffers. Again, these also need to be taken into consideration. Then inequality. So inequality, we acknowledge that issues of inequality are not just a KZN issue, they are a national issue, given that South Africa has got one of the highest inequality rates in the world. So the gap between the rich and the poor is a big concern. So disproportionate impacts on low income and informal settlement needs to be paid attention to. I will just quickly highlight, I know that there are presentations that will come maybe today and tomorrow will go in detail in terms of some of these sectors. But I just wanted to highlight quickly how some of these sectors are affected. So in terms of water security, we have got issues of drought and variable inflows challenging bulk water supply and reliability. We have seen in many of the urban areas, not just in KZN, how some residents go for days without water. Flood-driven water quality incidences such as sediment and sewage overflows, non-revenue water and infrastructure losses exacerbate scarcity. So non-revenue water and infrastructure losses are when you have water leaks of already purified water. So not only are you wasting water as a resource, you're also wasting the amount of money that has already been put into to recycle and to clean that water. So solutions for water security would include wetlands, aquifer recharge, and catchment restoration. Agriculture and food systems. So heat and moisture stress affecting yields of sugarcane and horticultural products. Increased pest disease pressures with warmer conditions. These affect livestock as well as our crops. Some crops become more prone to disease, to pests. Flood damage to soils, irrigation and access roads. Flood damage washes away topsoil. So without topsoil, it's very difficult to have a sustainable agricultural system. In some cases where there is drought, we need irrigation. We also need access roads to take our produce to markets. In terms of adaptation, climate smart practices, there are a lot of them now that are being practiced in different countries, in different places, even here in South Africa. There are quite a few case studies of climate smart practices, drought tolerant varieties, diversification of livelihoods. We know Ms. Modise already alluded to the issue of diversification. And then we have coastal infrastructure, where we also need to be looking at adaptation and setback lines. Sorry, just try to run through. Let me skip all this because that will already be covered by other people. So in terms of the principles of climate justice, climate justice also is about equitable distribution of benefits and burdens. So Ms. Modise already talked about who pays for all these things that the developed countries owe us in terms of paying for some of these impacts. Protecting vulnerable communities is also important. Adaptation pathways and actions. So these are some of the solutions that we could be looking at. Upgrading stormwater upgrades and nature-based solutions, protect, restore, and connect wetlands, heat risk management, water loss reduction, early warning systems are also crucial. Some of these will be covered by people who are going to talk about the urban areas, so I will skip that because I am running out of time. So another solution that I would like to bring here is the issue of carbon credits, what they are and how they can help generate income for municipalities and for communities, type of carbon markets, voluntary and compliant markets, and we see that they can assist in funding community-based mitigation adaptation projects, bringing public and private partnerships for green infrastructure. I will not talk on this slide, but it just highlights that for voluntary carbon, you need buyers, you need pricing, you need brokers, all those that are important to get your carbon projects going. And in terms of community safeguards, we need to ensure that there are no issues of land grabs and exploitation of communities there. Another solution is more involvement and engagement of CBOs and NGOs, because they are the first responders, because they have local knowledge, because they are trusted voices, and because they will bridge the gap between the policy and what is happening on the ground. They can play roles in risk assessment and early warning, education and awareness, adaptation projects, disaster response, recovery, policy advocacy. I'm trying to grow through as quickly as possible. And there is a need for government to strengthen partnerships with CBOs and NGOs. So you have these slides with you. You can always go back and look at them. And in terms of policy instruments for just transition, I will not cover this one because Ms. Modise has already spoken about some of the policies that the country has. And also not just about the policies that she talked about. There is also discussions around issues of loss and damage. There are also discussions around the gender action plan in regard to climate change, given that women are most affected by climate change. So we're talking about implementation for governance, finance, and partnerships. Enablers for implementation, again, integrating planning to align with IDPs, SDFs, disaster risk and climate strategies, data monitoring, finance, community partnerships, and capacity building is essential. What are our quick wins in terms of action? The top flood hotspots, we need to start with those. Drainage fixes, nature-based interventions, look at urban heat action pilots, monitoring water leaks, early warning, outreach with local radio and WhatsApp groups. Confirm data sources and upgrade localized maps, prioritize 5 to 7 flagship interventions, set up monitoring indicators and reporting, define roles and timelines. So those are some of the references that we used. Before I say thank you and before I move on, I would like to highlight one of the things that Dr. Fikile highlighted I should include. Let me just see if I can share my screen now. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, share screen. Hold on. I'm just trying to see. Sorry, Kukosha, can you help me again? Okay, just hold on. So while my son is coming to help me with the sharing of the screen of this Word document, I also included a lady called Kifilwe. She runs a carbon company, and it's an NPO, and it's locally led. Do you guys see this Word document that says Agent Climate Actions for KwaZulu-Natal?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. So this just gives priority action. It highlights priority actions that are needed, the key roles and responsibilities of who will do what, the lead stakeholders, the role of CBOs and NGOs, and the timelines. I think that including the role of CBOs and NGOs is crucial because KZN's biggest resource are people. That is your biggest resource that you have. And you've got people who are working on the grassroots level. You've got people with local knowledge. You've got people whose voices are trusted. I did highlight this in that slide. So I will not also go through this document because it's also going to be part of your workshop package. But strengthening early warning preparedness because of the issues of the hazards, the flooding, sea level rise, coastal erosion, those things are critical, very critical before the next storm season comes. You've got flood water management, you've got climate change, climate resilient agriculture, coastal protection, erosion control, renewable energy and just transition, waste management and circular economy. I have seen a few notices that highlight which beaches in Durban you cannot swim at because of sewage. So we need, KZN needs to have better waste management and circular economy policies and strategies, community education, biodiversity conservation. And just for me to add before I hand over to Kifilwe to talk about carbon credit project, is that there also needs to be an issue of accountability. Accountability, where people who are supposed to do what they need to do should be accountable and should take responsibility. Because without accountability and responsibility, this will just be another discussion. It will just be another summit, and we have had so many of those. We need results now. We need action now. So thank you so much again for this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to being at the summit and discussing with all of you. I will hand over to my partner, Kifilwe, who will talk very briefly. I thought this was very important for you guys to know what is happening in the carbon space. Kifilwe, over to you.
I'm afraid your partner has only 2 minutes.
Kifilwe, you can do it in 2 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kifilwe Makinani. I'm from the Green Development Foundation. I would like to recognize all members present and all protocol observed in these 2 minutes. Briefly, Green Development Foundation project is an NPO.
Can you please write your presentation quickly?
I'm currently using the phone, so.
Okay, let me put it for you. Koshi?
It's different.
Okay, let me stop sharing mine.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, hold on. Maybe you can just speak while I'm loading your presentation.
Oh, yes. I was saying that the Green Development Foundation, it's an NPO. We are based in Gauteng, in Kempton Park, which is our head office, but we have other offices in other provinces. The GDF was established in 2015. We are 10 years in operation. Our work is mostly based in food and agriculture, environment and water, training skills, rural development. Our initiatives for carbon credits, we invited this meeting to give the brief of our intention to present of carbon credits, our participation and the credit initiatives. And our objectives is to implement climate smart farming techniques, which will increase carbon sequestration. We will do it through agroforestry. We'll do it through regenerative agriculture and livestock management. We aim to empower 5,000 farmers who are doing crops and livestock, both the smallholder farmers and the commercials. Our target is about 1 million hectares of those who are practicing regenerative agriculture, agroforestry, soil carbon sequestration, and those who are involved in livestock system, the rotational grazing. The guideline that we are currently busy with and will be following on this carbon space, we will work through the climate tax and climate bill and carbon regulation that are currently in our country, which was signed last year by the president. And our implementation strategy is that we will identify projects, farmers and hectares, and conduct a baseline on soil carbon. Although we already have some of the farmers in other provinces who are already practicing sustainable agriculture, which is based on cover cropping and rotational grazing. We continue with our engagement with the partners that we already have. We will train farmers on climate smart agriculture and implement carbon beneficial practices. We will monitor activities and collect data. And also we are planning to procure a carbon monitor system, which will monitor the carbon. And that will also help us to submit the data to bodies such as Vera and Gold Standard. After then being accredited to receive these carbon credits and then sell them, issue them in variable carbon credit sales. And if the project the outcome is successful, then we will expand the project. And then as the GDF, we are seeking support. We are still seeking support and funding for the project initiatives. We are looking at the government, the climate finance institution, private sectors, and other partnering companies that can partner with us. In conclusion, we recognize that carbon credits are tools for climate justice, and carbon needs to be rooted in equity, transparency, and access. And as the Green Development Foundation, we will use this opportunity to shape future that is just, green, and inclusive in carbon credits. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mambo, for the presentation. May I invite inputs or questions? From the left, I recognize no hand. From the right, there is only one hand next to me, not from the right. Over to you, MEC Smelane Mngadi.
Thank you very much, Premier. Good morning to you, Premier, Makosi, MECs, and all the colleagues in the meeting. Premier, I think we want to welcome all the presentations that have been made. I just have one question, and it probably, well, it can be responded to by all the presenters or Dr. Matlana in particular. I understood, Dr. Matlana, that you are saying climate change has to be implemented by everyone, and I agree there. And you gave us a good narrative on why it should be the case. But of late, I understood that there are some European countries who are recommissioning their coal, what do they call them? Plants. They are coal plants. Now, what impact does that have on the whole agenda, and what does it mean for all of us and South Africa in particular? The first presentation indicated that in South Africa we have towns that were actually or are actually based on coal mining. So if you have some European countries that are recommissioning, and we are going towards decommissioning everything in its entirety, what does it mean for us as a country? Thank you very much, Premier.
There is another hand from our MEC Mayor from Public Works and Infrastructure.
Thank you, Honourable Premier, Honourable Nkosi, Honourable MECs. Just two things. First of all, just maybe at the Secretariat of this meeting, Honourable Premier, and I did raise it last time, that if we're going to have meetings about climate change, we have to lead through example, and I'm a bit worried to see renewable plastic, single-use plastic in bottles and in the packets and things. And if we're going to discuss climate change and environmental affairs, we need to lead by example in this committee, and I do think it's something we need to take serious, Honourable Premier. But on the earlier presentation, I was wondering with discussing the science, and it's something that we've been finding a lot more at Public Works in collaboration with COPTA, is that we're struggling more and more to find proper boreholes or to sink proper boreholes, especially in the Zululand and Kanyakura areas, as the water very quickly becomes extremely salted and other chemicals. And I can't help but wonder if it is because the water tables underneath us is dropping so low that that chemicals or the minerals and salt is now seeping in. And that's going to cause a great crisis because many of our infrastructure, unfortunately, due to the lack of other water infrastructure, is dependent on boreholes. And now we are really struggling. Premier, I visited schools recently where we tried 7 times and couldn't find usable water at any of the 7 places, which means that school has absolutely no water. So is that something that's come up in the discussions regarding the science of and the impact of climate change on KwaZulu-Natal? Thank you, Honourable Premier.
Well, Dr. Matlana.
Thank you, Premier, and thank you, MECs, for the questions. Allow me, MECs Melanie, to start with MEC Mayor's question, because it's easier. MEC Mayor, the answer to your question is no. I do not know of any work that has looked at the shifts in water table in KZN. And I hope to be re-invited to this session, and I will provide an answer, MEC. The reason I know that we can find out that is because in my team I do have someone who is who works on he calls it hydrological modeling at very fine geospatial scale. So I will provide a feedback when I come back. Thank you. Chair, let me attempt Mrs. Melanie's question. I do not think it's more of a political question than a science question, Minister. And I'm not a politician. But you are raising a very important issue of if, as South Africa, we are saying, let's have a transition away from fossil fuels and go to renewable energies. And yet, our partners in other countries are proceeding, in fact, are reopening coal mines Isn't that some form of dichotomy? So it's a fair question. Officially, what I read from official information from Europe is that this is a short-term response triggered by externalities that were outside their control. Also, whilst the issue of climate change requires coherent, consistent global action, individual countries are the ones that are feeling the impacts. So for me, we may be, MEC, past the stage, the era of looking at others as examples. People of my age, well, where I come from, when you are good at something, sithi ungumlungu. Perhaps we've reached a stage where we should be the leaders and set our own priorities and determine our fate. Perhaps. So, as I said, it's a political question. These are political decisions. At the heart of climate change, there are two issues about climate change response. One is political determination, political will. So I do not take it lightly that amongst us, we have the MECs, we have the Premier, we have traditional leadership. Because at the heart of climate change response is political leadership. Second core issue of climate action is finance, investment decisions. And when these two combine and are aligned, then there's a coherent trajectory that brings people, brings in financial resources, builds institutions, provides a coherent response. Now I'm beginning to sound like a politician, so let me stop.
Yes, over to you.
Right, let me try. Can I go?
I would like to attempt also to address.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Mambo.
Okay, sorry.
I'm sorry, there's another hand which I wish to entertain.
Thank you, and thank you, Premier, and all honourable guests. I am pleased to say we have been doing a lot of work up in Nkanya-Gote, particularly on the coastal plain. One of the issues I wanted to highlight with the previous presentation is there's a lot of focus on floods. It's in people's face. There's been a lot of news reports. It's an urban center. It's accessible. There's a lot of data. One of the key things we need to address is the data paucity from rural areas, which are essentially our blind spots. So the area where we've been working in Nkanya-Gote, on the coastal plain in Umhlabi-Alingana, it's a coastal-driven system. I'll be talking about it shortly, but when we arrived there, there were no weather stations. And it's actually still below the drought reserve. So what you've seen there is a massive reduction in the water table, but there's also geological features there. So there are various different aquifer layers. The fresh water is sitting on the higher layer. The salty water is actually coming up from the Cretaceous layer, which is millions of years old, and it's basically an old seabed. But as your groundwater table drops, you need to drill deeper, which means you're accessing the deeper layers. But globally, there has been such a drop in groundwater, it's actually changing the tilt of the earth. So we are overutilizing our groundwater resources, but more on the Umhlabi-Alingana story shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. In 1 minute, Dr. Mambo, you wanted to add something?
I think the expert on groundwater has already covered what I wanted to say. But also just to highlight that groundwater was not properly managed. So it was not something that they had policies and things to manage it. It was mainly more about surface water. So, but now the attention is also going to how do we manage our groundwater supply. And that's the first one. The second one that was raised in terms of the issue of coal power stations. I think it's, as Dr. Matlala already said, it is a very political decision. And I think as South Africa, we also then need to prioritize what are our developmental needs. So we can adopt that mixed what you call it, mixed power solutions, so that we do not completely throw away our current sources of power for new sources until the new sources come onto the grid. That's just a personal opinion, but thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the presentations and also the inputs and the responses. Thank you very much. May I request that we proceed to the next item? I think we are good now on time, though we did not start on time, but now we have been able to adjust. The next item is on spatial integration, rural and township development case studies. The first presenter will be from South Durban Basin, MUT. They did not indicate the name here. I'm not quite sure, Dr. Ndlovu, I don't see the name. It's Dr. Wapa. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Premier, and I want to acknowledge all the dignitaries that are present in this place. And we want to thank you for extending our invite to us as Mangosuthu University of Technology, MUT. We are situated in the heart of the promised land of Umlazi. And it's such a pleasure for us to be here and to talk about a practical aspect of climate action. And MUT is a university that has been existing for more than 45 years in the country, and we are, as I've said, situated in the townships. And for us, it's a pleasure and a blessing to be part of the township, because as sometimes our students, they brag about MUT being a little Harvard. I mean, that's light that enlight the society in terms of the township. Now, we will talk about a topic that is more practical, and it's mostly about what we do, what we can do, and what we can expect from the communities and from the authorities and from all the stakeholders to tackle the issue of the climate change. Now, why this special integration for climate change or climate action is important? Be very pragmatic and practical. It's because it helps us to reduce the exposure. And in reducing the exposure to the harmful actions of climate change, it helps us also to identify some of the areas, especially for us in Umlazi, identifying the areas that are prone to flooding and to any other effect of climate change. And the spatial integration also, as our focus as MUT, will also allow us to look at the way we can reduce or cut the emissions to reach the zero carbon emissions that are causing the effect of climate change. But also we look at the building resilience, obviously resilience, adaptation, and mitigation. And I'm so supportive of my colleague from CSR who said adaptation is not a very sustainable solution. If it's true that we are already affected by climate change, adaptation can be just a solution, a short-term solution, but we need to be more innovative in the way of tackling the issues of climate change. Now, MUT is an academic institution. We have research, community engagement, and teaching as well as our core mission. And climate change is one of the hot topics that MUT is also trying to look at in such a way that we can bring our little contribution to see how we can tackle this issue of climate change. Now, the first thing that we're doing is to identify the risks snapshot in townships, and mostly in Umlazi where we are. And in fact, quite a number of my predecessors have already spoken about these kind of issues, which are mostly focusing on the intense rainfall, flooding, the slope instabilities that we find in informal settlement, even in townships. We have the issues of sea level rise. I mean, we're not far from the sea being in Umlazi. We also have issues related to heat stress, urban inland effect, especially for dense areas in town, in Umlazi, or even any other township, because we're not only focusing on Umlazi, but also looking at other townships as our area of focus when it comes to climate action. Now, also, obviously, water security. Whenever we talk, we've already raised the issue of water scarcity in the previous presentation, in the discussion that took place, and it's also another issue that is affected by the climate change, because we know when there's rise in temperature, we have issues of evapotranspiration that can cause scarcity, and also the aging infrastructures that we have in the country for water. Now, what is the MUT capacity, and what could MUT contribute to? As an academic institution, MUT is focusing mostly on research and community engagement, obviously teaching as well as the core mission. And in terms of climate change, research and community engagement are the places where we can easily bring our contribution. In terms of research, we are trying to build up the body of knowledge on different projects and research projects that are given to students. Some of the projects may be focusing on stormwater management, sustainable housing, waste to energy, green infrastructures, even biofuels. In fact, there have been quite a number of groundbreaking studies done at MUT in terms of biofuels. For example, I take a study that was done a few years ago, producing jet fuel from microalgae that is grown into a saline water, taking the case of the ocean, because we are a coastal city, then we could grow microalgae and stimulate, because the microalgae, if you look at the literature, the amount of lipid is known as very small, but there is a way of stimulating the amount of lipid in microalgae in order to produce more lipid, and the lipid can be used after processing to produce jet fuel, even producing green diesel. And these kind of studies have been done at MUT, and for some of our partners, they know that we've been very active in this area, and in fact, even in the area of renewable energy as well. We have quite a number of studies that we are trying to undertake, and looking for fundings to get partners who can venture with us to help us to see that we are trying to undertake, and looking for fundings to get partners who can venture with us to help us do some of the studies. Now, in fact, talking about the partnerships, we need to partner with quite a number of units, and especially the provincial government, the Kuni municipalities. We really need to partner with them so that we can do more studies, and these studies can help us together tackle this issue of climate change, especially in our dense, in our townships. And we are in township, and we know the kind of issues that our populations are facing when it comes to climate change. Now, obviously, the research project and the student project are going end to end, but when it comes to student project, we're looking at sometimes employing the graduate who've got no employment, and we can use them in some of the projects that we want to do for climate change. And we've been looking for fundings, and if there are people who are interested to help us, please do so, because we need as many interns that we can, and these interns can be given tasks in the townships in terms of educating the population and developing techniques that can help people to tackle the issues of climate change in the townships. We've looked at that, and based on that, we've also received generously a certain amount of equipment from our partners in Germany, And this is with the big support of one of the friends of MUT named Dr. Holu. We managed to get a good equipment and a very instrumental unit that could help us to do a lot of studies on climate change, a lot of experimental work on climate change. And from that equipment, that when it arrived, we managed to train close to 38 students. Some of them are graduates, some of them are students, and we've given them a lot of information on climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, and also climate change resilience. We've done that, and it's 38, and another set will come, but provided that we have enough funding for that one. But now, how do we carry on with our strategy to tackle this issue as an MUT in the area where we are? We will be using the communication, the education, and some actions. Communications, as I'm saying, by training, for example, the community leaders. We can organize short courses. Again, the next set of short courses will be targeting the community leaders and some of the people in Umlazi or any other township. Then they will be equipped with the knowledge, and that knowledge will help us to be able to get the message of climate change through the townships, because it's true, some people in the townships don't understand the concept of climate change, and they need to know it so that they can be equipped with the knowledge in order for them to be tackling the issue of climate change. And these communications and training will be based on, for example, how to reduce the carbon dimension, the carbon dioxide dimension, I meant, and what are the strategies that can be put in place, renewable energy, and anything that is relevant for carbon dioxide emission. It's also another part of this communication and training and community engagement actions. We're looking at how to educate the population in not being relying on CFC, carbon fluorocarbon, the CFC spray. Most of them are used in our houses, and some of them are very, very harmful, and they are also agent of climate change. Then we can look at way to develop new products that are environmentally friendly. This could be an area, especially with our students who are doing chemical engineering. We can develop different types of products that can be used to not to be relying on the CFC product. Another aspect of that communication is related to the reduction of deforestation. But yeah, we're looking at planting more trees because we're dealing with communities, and we need to educate them about that and how can that be done. And now, what do we have in terms of capacity? We have a climate change lab, and that was fully equipped by, as I've said before, by our German partners. And we can do a lot of analysis in this climate change lab. We can do the air quality measurement. In this lab, measure the quality of ambient air around us, and anywhere in the place we can mimic as well the samples and do the analysis in the lab. We can also assess the level of carbon emissions with the equipment that you have, and assessing, and also do continuous monitoring. And that's the kind of equipment that you have. Also, we have equipment that you can take and to monitor, for example, the level of SO2, NOx, CO, monitor all the greenhouse gases that you have surrounding MUT or even outside of MUT, even in Umlazi. We also have the same equipment can help us to assess the level of marine pollution. We are a coastal city, and the equipment is quite relevant for some of the application relevant to this oil pollution. And this is the picture of that equipment for marine oil pollution. We have it in our lab. That was given to us by our German partners with the support of Dr. Olu, as I'm saying. I've said it before. And we can also do the stack emission testing. And stack emission testing goes from sampling and measuring the emission itself, and also monitoring, but measuring the stack is all about the waste, the industrial waste and pollutant that is emitted within the environment. And with this stack emission testing system, we can assess the level of pollution from the waste coming from any petrochemical or any processing unit around us or anywhere in the city or in the country, wherever we can be given a chance to do so. And this is the equipment for the stack. This is the stack analyzer equipment, just a picture, but we have it in the lab as well. And yeah, that's the setup, the whole setup for the stack analyzer. And also, because we aiming for the green revolution, we have project that we want to start a project of looking at the ways to produce hydrogen from MUT using the relevant biomass that we can have. And this will help us as well in the energy transition to be able to see what can be done. There are quite a number of options, but it's a study on its own that need to be taken seriously with the help of the student, the postgraduate student that you have, the postdoctoral fellows, the research fellows, and the capacity that you have. We have colleagues that are well rounded in terms of scientific research. They can help us to do this. Yeah. Then conclusion. We just trying to show you that we have the potential as an institution, an academic institution. We have the potential to do impactful studies on climate change in Umlazi and even anywhere in the country. And the spatial integration is not just about the urban design, but it's also about the equity. I think there was a previous presentation where they spoke about equity, sustainability, and climate security. That was my story for today. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Dr. Bawa. The next presentation is going to be made by Northern KZN, Ms. Van Rensbeck from Sion.
I usually like to stand, but I'll sit. Right, good morning, everyone, and good morning, Honourable Premier, Honourable Members, all protocol observed. This is a new space for me, and I was very humbled by the invitation. I'm not sure whether to say thank you yet or not. But in science, we have the philosophy that we're all equal and we all learn from each other. So I hope this is a learning space because I do believe in two-way communication. And I've learned a lot this morning, and I'm going to make one little correction on our last speaker. I don't like to make assumptions, so maybe the first question I should start, because he prompted me, he reminded me, how many people in this room are 90% sure they would actually be able to explain climate change dynamics and exactly how and why it's happening properly? Anybody? One? Two? I'm sure Brian can. Maybe he stepped out the room. So we're here talking about climate change, but I think the previous speakers really highlighted something vitally important. People may have heard about climate change. In the area where we're working, only 49% of the population we surveyed had actually even heard of climate change. And those who had heard of it do not think it's going to affect them because there's no pollution in their area. So as step one, and I take what Dr. Madiso said this morning, leave no one behind. Please, Honourable Premier, could the very first step in the action plan be appropriate Zulu language material with local content that explains clearly what climate change is, what causes it, and what the potential impacts will be, because without that first step, people do not have the agency to make the decisions required to present a more vulnerable, resilient future. Okay, with that said, and then the second correction I'm going to make is please don't plant trees. So there's a global phenomenon where I'm sure many of you would have heard that some people in Europe are advocating that tree planting is going to solve the climate problem. It will not. It's a European-dominated concept. Our African ecosystems are grassy ecosystems. We have enormous soil carbon stocks in our grassy ecosystems. And trees, where trees grow in forests, that's fine, but in South Africa we've actually got very, very few forests. We've got more grasslands and savannas, and carbon is far better stored in the ground than on the surface, because we're becoming a more flammable country and habitat and world. We warned Europe about the potential for fires at the last UNCCD conference in India. They ignored us. And you see what's happening with their fires there. Trees take water, they do all sorts of nasty things to our environments, but you'll see more of that now. So, but protect your grasslands. So I come from the National Research Foundation. I work for a national facility within that called SAON, which is the South African Environmental Observation Network. Somebody may have seen me go like this when Brian mentioned Dr. Bupape. It's because she's our MD, so we're very lucky to have her. And our role is essentially to do global change research, to really understand human-driven impacts on our ecosystems versus natural variability, and the impact that these changes are having on the ecosystem services that ecosystems provide. And I'm going to be presenting work from a case study we're doing in Umhlabi Yalingana, where we've got a long-term presence. And with that, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Nkosi Mwalo, who is one of our collaborators. And in a very progressive mood, he is actually one of the hosts of one of the DSTI's research infrastructures, which is the FTON landscape in northern Maputoland. So thank you for coming today. So we believe in co-generation, and we're working in that area and have been doing for a long, long time. But let's take a step back and say, what are we facing as a country? And these are the realities. There's high inequality, there's poverty and unemployment. Have we made enough progress in addressing these? Would anybody say yes? I certainly wouldn't. Now we've got climate change and environmental degradation. So the question is, if we expect to fix these issues using the same way of thinking and doing things as we have in the past, with all these multiple shocks and stresses being added to the system, do you think we're going to succeed? So perhaps we need to try something new. And I was very encouraged by the Honourable Premier's opening when he said today that we really need to work together. It's a collective responsibility. There needs to be alignment. I couldn't agree with you more. Very much a common vision, because what's happening at the moment is there's a mismatch, and people and organizations and even government departments seem to be working at cross purposes. So yeah, I was very encouraged by what I heard in your opening this morning. So thank you for that. And just to remind everybody that we are a social ecological system. So what that means is people rely on the environment is impacted by us, we impact on the environment, that impacts our economy. It is a system. So perhaps we need a systems approach, and I think all the speakers this morning have spoken about that, sort of working together, working holistically, and sort of revamping our economies, as Brian said, and sort of really taking a systems level approach to this. So this is essentially a social ecological system. You've got your human dynamics, our well-being, our governance, our environment. You've got the ecological system with all sorts of dynamics happening within that. And quite frankly, nobody would be alive today if we didn't have functioning ecosystems. The more our ecosystems are degraded, the less likely people are to make a livelihood. and succeed. So really, I agree with what the Premier said earlier, is that we need a collective effort, it's a collective responsibility, and with that also comes accountability. And I can guarantee you, if anybody tries to go at this alone, they're going to fail and they're going to fall far and hard. So we do need each other. So our key question that we are interested in my node, we've got country coverage, but we're looking at what are the relative impacts of climate and land use, land cover change on ecosystem services. So we've got 2 sites in the country. One is up in the Cathedral Peak area, and we can tell you that for all the years we've been observing there, because we've got a long record, so it's easy for us to see directional change. Our absolute gold mine is long-term data. And by the way, we do collect a lot of data, so those people looking for data, it's free and open access, so there you go. But what we've been able to pick up there is that relative to the long-term mean, all the years that we've been monitoring since 2012 have been above average. So that means it's warmer. So with climate change, you would have heard of global warming. Warming is energy. Energy is what drives climate. That's why we're looking at climate change. That's sort of a snapshot. So a lot of it's got to do around energy and how that changes the dynamics in the system. So it definitely is getting warmer. Last year, May was 4.8 degrees warmer than the long-term May record. If that doesn't get you frightened, I don't know what will. So then what is land cover change? Land cover change is essentially a process whereby the vegetation is changing for some reason. It's not necessarily a direct human intervention. It can be linked to that. But what we're seeing in South Africa, and in fact globally, is an increase in woody species coming in. We don't need to plant trees. They're coming in by themselves. And this is most likely due to an increased CO2 response. So not only does CO2 make the planet warm, it also gives plants the food they need to grow. And there are different kinds of plants, and these are what we call C3 plants, and they can take advantage of the extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So the trees are now starting to outcompete our grasslands. So we've actually got a problem with disappearing grasslands, and the communities in Umhlaba-Yelangana will be able to tell you that. That's one of their biggest concerns, is bush encroachment. Then you have things like invasive species coming in. Some of you might know Sandaneswa, others may know Parthenium or Triffidweed. I found out yesterday that there is a Zulu name for it, which translates to "he is a murderer," which I quite agree with. It's reduced Ethiopia's GDP by 5%. People have had to abandon their land because of this plant. It is up in Umhlaba-Yelangana. The timber trucks are spreading it all over the place, and so is the graveling of roads. It'll destroy your farming, so please watch out for that. Mbali, you're taking notes. Then we have land use change, which is essentially a choice. You have a choice to do something with your land. And I guess the headline that I'm going to make at the end is the choice you make on your land today is essentially a water use decision. And the choice you make on your land today is going to have impacts on how resilient we are into the future. So it's one of the things we might not be able to change what's happening in Europe and the whole climate dynamic or whatever, but one thing we do have control of is what decisions we make in terms of our land. And that's why this land use planning concept is absolutely critical. So going up to Umhlaba-Yelangana, it's on the northern KwaZulu-Natal coast. I call it the neglected gem. And if you look at those pictures, the blue lines going from South Africa up to the middle one, which is showing you the broader location, there you can see on the far, I'm dyslexic, so this side, Cozy Bay at the top, which is on the northern Mozambican border, and Lake Sabaya at the bottom. How many of you have heard of Lake Sabaya? Anybody? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Lake Sabaya is the largest freshwater lake in southern Africa. It's bigger than, I think, Dargle, Midmar, and a couple of the built-up dams combined was. It's a very unique system, and it's absolutely beautiful. And it's a Ramsar site. It's within the World Heritage Park. a really, really beautiful gem. But what do you notice when you look at that area where it is? So if you see there's a blue line, I don't know if you can see my pointer on the screen. Yes, no? So if you look at this blue line, that is the Pongola River, which flows into Mozambique. What rivers are flowing into this coastal area? None. There are no rivers flowing into this catchment from upper catchment areas, which is a unique situation. Everywhere else, you'll get rivers from the mountains or whatever bringing water to your coastal area. So what does that mean? This area is dependent on rainfall for recharge. So if it doesn't rain, the groundwater table doesn't recharge. It's a very wetland-rich area. Historically, it's been very wet. It's known for the number of wetlands there. But if that so it's a groundwater-driven system, and if that groundwater supply dries up in this area, there is no alternative water supply. People say, oh, pipe in from Jacini. Jacini's oversubscribed. Maybe they should review the water licenses, whoever's using that water. But yeah, this area is particularly vulnerable. There's high poverty, low literacy levels, there's high unemployment, making people vulnerable. There's governance complexity, a deep, rich history going way back. There's also a lack of infrastructure. And what's more is it's like a sand pit. It's a big sandy place, so there's very low agricultural potential. You're not going to get rich off the land in this place. And the key thing is people's lives and livelihoods in this area are very strongly interlinked with that groundwater system. So that's a very strong coupling between a social ecological system. So what's the problem? This is the lake level of Lake Sabaya, and it goes from 1965 all the way through to 2024. And essentially what you see is a lovely fluctuating lake level until around sort of 2000 here, and it just starts plummeting down, 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 down. And then it reached this area where it had never been below this area before, and it just carried on going down. Now, in water legislation, there's something called the Ecological Drought Reserve. And for this area, the system mustn't be below 16.5 meters above sea level for more than 5 years. That was breached in 2016. In other words, it had been below that level since 2013, 14. Nobody knew because the gauges were dry and DWS wasn't monitoring anymore. But then we stepped in and we're working together with them. And it has remained below the Ecological Drought Reserve since then. Technically, what that means is there is no allocable water left in that system. If we need more water for people, there isn't any. You technically shouldn't be issuing any licenses in that area. So what's going on? Is it climate? Is it land use? A lot of people are blaming the gum plantations. Maybe, maybe not. But the bottom line is this drop in the water table, which is about a 4.5 to 5 meter drop in the water table, which is in a massive volume in that big area, has resulted in ecosystem degradation. I love old photos, so this is from 1942. What you're looking at is a 7,000-year-old peatland. You know Dugger. Anybody know Dugger? Peat. It's a very rich, carbon-rich sink of organic material. The people there farm in it. It's the only way you can farm and get food because outside of those areas, it's just sand. But for peat to form, it needs to be permanently wet. This is 7,000 years old, which tells you the system has, for at least that period, been a wet system. This is what that area looks like today. So what you're seeing is significant land transformation. So we're talking land use change from grassland to plantation forestry, thanks to the colonialists who came in there in the 1950s and decided to plant exotic trees all over the place. And that industry has continued. And as a result, well, we don't know if it is a result of that. That's one of the questions. The brown bits you're seeing there, that isn't water, that's burnt peat. So this is a picture of that area in 1965 taken by Eugene Moll. And that's a picture taken by me with absolute tears in my eyes, watching carbon monoxide, methane, sulfur dioxide, plus dust going up in smoke. So that's 7,000 years of peatland going up in smoke. It was burning. And the reason peat burns is because it dries up. It can only dry up if the water table drops. So again, we're seeing the consequences of that declining lake level on these peatlands. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is when a carbon sink becomes a carbon source. So this is releasing carbon. It's one of these tipping points where you have a positive feedback. The drier it gets, the more the wetlands release carbon, and then, yeah, it just creates a catalytic impact, which is not good. Right. So what happened then, that was in about 2016, and I was called to a community meeting in KwaZibi where the Nduna from KwaZibi said to us, you know, we asked the community, because a friend of mine had Sihle Bokuseni, she had a school there, and she was like, that's it, I'm going to have to close down my school. I said, no, this is when your work starts. So she called a meeting, and we had a discussion with community members. We asked them, why do you think this is happening? And Nduna from KwaZibi said, we know the gums are taking water. That was his assumption. But we've got a lack of economic opportunity, and we're obviously worried about water security. They hadn't heard of climate change. So when we explained the climate change aspect to them, then they really, really got worried. And they're desperate for alternatives to timber plantation in that area. But there are a lot of barriers to actually transitioning from that. But yeah, basically they said we need economically viable alternatives. Everybody wants to make a buck. This is about money. And what can we do about it? So eventually, so the other thing I wanted to mention, I did allude to it earlier, is the fact that if you don't have data in an area, you can't manage what you don't measure. And when we arrived, there was one weather station in Mbazwan, but now with SAON, we've managed to put a number of weather stations, groundwater monitoring, rain gauges, all of that, and all our data is free and open access. Anybody listening, you're welcome to have it. So yeah, we're doing a lot of monitoring there. So we started this, we're there long term, we're doing long-term work there, but we had a short-term 3-year project funded by the WRC to try and sort of address this issue. And we started by asking the traditional councils, Mbila, Tembi, and Zakali, we had meetings with their councils, and we said, what are your challenges? What do you think the most important economic activities in this area are? And if you had a magic wand, what would your land use preferences, what would your alternatives be into the future? So we had those workshops because we wanted their perspectives and their context to inform the research work that we then did and took forward. In addition to that, we did household surveys to benchmark what they came up with. So we looked at actual data. And essentially, I have the full list of challenges, which I'm very happy to share. But for our purposes in the modeling, what was absolutely top at everybody's list was water security. Followed by that, it was unemployment. And we knew if we wanted to address this, we just needed to disentangle unemployment with income. So we had income, and there were a lot of concerns around the natural integrity of the system. So we put natural resource integrity as the key challenges. So essentially, the idea was, with your future land use preferences, would your choice make those challenges better or worse? Then we asked, what are the important economic activities that you think are important? And the traditional councils came up with wood carving. There's a perception that the timber and the trees bring in a lot of income. They mentioned crop farming, fishing, and livestock. So this is a perception. We were sitting in a workshop saying, what do you think makes the most money for the people here? Then we did the household survey, because in science we test perceptions, so we collect data. Lo and behold, what actually we found was that if you take grants out of the system, which is the biggest source of income, which means we've got a dependent population, tourism, employment, natural resource use, so the crafts definitely there, crop farming, livestock. Then we have gum trees and timber, so the gum tree people making money from owning plantations is the yellow, and people employed by the forestry is red. People employed through tourism operations is in green. Okay, so perception, maybe people aren't being honest, is what the forestry companies told us, that they're not actually getting. But what we took this as there are probably a few people getting very rich out of the gum plantations, but possibly at the expense of the rest of the households. So the average household is not benefiting from a very large area of plantation. So then the next step, and there's a massive big book there for all the scientists in the room if you want to see how we did this. We looked at land use change, we looked at did all sorts of measurements on plants, we wanted to get the most accurate model from the past to the present. People in the area were very concerned about bush encroachment. We wanted to actually model that to see. So we try to get as accurate as data as we could in all these models. I'm not going to try and explain all of that, but basically we did a lot of cool science. And the results were that in terms of the land use change, we picked up a major reduction in grasslands, a major reduction in wetlands, increase in settlements, obviously, a dramatic increase in gums. There's now over 30,000 hectares of gum plantation in that area. It was a doubling within the last sort of 15 years. And there has been an increase in thicket, but it's also been taken over by settlement, so there's not a net increase. But yeah, thickets are increasing. But the bottom line is your grasslands are disappearing fast. This is an endangered, verging on critically endangered ecosystem, the Maputo land wooded grasslands. You don't get them anywhere else in the world. Right, then I don't know if you all know about evapotranspiration, but it's essentially the amount of water that plants use. Now, a lot of studies use proxies, model data, because it's difficult to measure this kind of stuff. But what we do in SAON is we like to measure as many variables as possible so we can use them to validate our models. And we measured the things out there as best as we could, and lo and behold, as with all other studies elsewhere in the world, the eucalyptus have the highest evapotranspiration. In other words, they're taking the most water from the system. So is the bush, and the grasslands are taking the least water. This isn't opinion, this is data. We also found, interestingly, that the grasslands are actually the best land cover for recharge. So if it rains over an indigenous forest versus a thicket versus a plantation versus a grassland, more of that water gets into the groundwater table when it falls on a grassland than any of the other vegetation types. We've tried to translate that, so when we do the communication back to the communities, they understand that under all these different land uses, they do have impacts on the degree to which that groundwater table can recharge. Then we also looked at the rainfall patterns from past to present and how there might be climate shifts, because that area sits on a climate transition zone between the tropical and the subtropical, and quite frankly, we really don't know what's going to go on. And what we found was there had definitely been below average rainfall since 2000, but more interestingly, now everybody talks about extreme events. Now this is the bizarre case in this area. There were very few extreme rainfall events in this area. Very few. This thing on the bottom, the graph on the bottom just shows the frequency of, the frequency of extreme events. By extreme events, we're talking rainfall events of over 30 millimeters. So this is an area where they would usually experience tropical rainfall, cyclone rainfall periodically. It's normal for that system. They weren't getting any of that. For 20 years, there were only a few extreme events, which we didn't sort of think much of, okay, until we did some other fancy science with isotopes and looking at the groundwater level and the rainfall. And what we found with the isotope data is that there's only groundwater recharge if you have rainfall events of over 30 mils. So this goes back to what Brian was saying earlier about don't look at averages. Processes and details count. So what that means is if you have 30 mils of rain in 1 week, you're not going to get your recharge in your groundwater table. If you have 30 mils or more in 24 hours, you will get recharge into your groundwater table. So it's important to understand these nuances and processes. So that was cool. Okay, but now what we're trying to get is it the climate? Is it the gums? Who's to blame? So we did an experiment. This is what you can do when you do modeling. and we ripped all the trees, the forestry, out of the ecosystem. We pretended they'd never been planted, and then we ran the model to see what would the impact be. Now, if you look at these two lines, what you're looking at is the lake level of Lake Sabaya from 1959. That's just the starter of the model. Don't worry about that. But from sort of 1963, you see these patterns. We know there were lots of tropical cyclone inputs there. There was a mega drought in the 80s we all know about. And then you see these declines. What you can see here from 2000 is both lines are declining. So the blue line is the model, the experiment we did in the model without forestry. So as though forestry had never been planted, it was just grassland. And the red line is the actual model output with the actual land use over that time. Both are declining. What that tells us is climate is the dominant signature. So it's the below average rainfall without the extreme events that is causing this problem. However, the forestry has had an impact, and the impact is what pushed the system below the ecological reserve. And when the system went below the ecological reserve, from the household surveys, we were able to discern that people started losing livelihoods. Their cattle couldn't get water. They couldn't farm in their wetlands. They couldn't find reeds. So the bottom line is climate is a dominant signature. Forestry tips it to a more vulnerable tipping point, which actually has the knock-on consequences for households. Those households wouldn't have been as vulnerable if forestry hadn't been in the area. So based on our data, and we acknowledge people may have been lying about where they were getting their incomes, but it doesn't seem like forestry is an economically viable solution for that area for the average household level, coupled with climate change when you're trying to build resilience and economic security. And there's a cautionary tale. We took some people to the CARP workshop that we worked with on another knowledge exchange, and it turns out one of them was a supplier to the king for the reeds. And this is lovely. What's lovely about doing co-generative science, when you're working with community members, you hear these narrative stories that just like, oh, wow. They couldn't meet the quota for the reeds from the area, in this area, which is where they traditionally get the reeds from, because of that drought. Major, major social impact. They had to go elsewhere to try and find the reeds. So that is a consequence of an ecosystem service that was lost because of that drought, which wouldn't have happened had there been a more appropriate land use. Okay, so then we go into the future. Now, the climate projections, some of you may have heard the word climate projections. Quite frankly, they are very uncertain. We know it's going to get warmer. There's absolutely no question. But when it comes to what's going to happen around rainfall, there's a lot of uncertainty. The general sense for the eastern seaboard with the most recent stuff is going to be generally drier, but lots of uncertainty. Anyway, so we said, what do you want to do in the future? The communities came up with a whole bunch of different ideas, which we had to sort of reduce down because you can only model one thing at a time. So we did that, and the idea was to model the land use preferences in a warmer, wetter, warmer, drier future, and then see what would happen not only to the water, but also to your employment, your income, and your natural resources. So the idea was to have a holistic approach and to see, do any of these land use choices improve or worsen the critical challenges in that area? So I'm not going to go through all the results, but basically these are the various things that we modeled. Dryland crop people were interested in, macadamia, marula. I think people have now given up on macadamia in that area, which is a good thing. But anyway, so yeah, this is just the area that we were interested in, that we were modeling. And so we had the formal forestry blocks, and in the experiment we ripped out 50% of the forestry. It was arbitrary, and then replaced it with whatever people wanted. And then we modeled into the future. I'm just going to show you the results for if there is no change. So status quo, things carry on as usual without any change in land use. So here's the model. The system's plummeting all the way down. And at this point, we modeled a future, what we call storylines. They're not predictions, they're storylines. So we created climate scenarios. Yeah, that's a whole big story. But basically, if we have a drier future in that area, you're going to see a systems collapse. That's worst case scenario. We know there's been subsequent rain, we know there's been a little bit of recovery of the system, but we know it's still below the drought reserve. What worried us, though, is when we took a wetter past, so 10%, so the period from 1972 to 2000, there were a lot of extreme rainfall events, above average rainfall. When we took that rainfall and added 10% and then modeled it, the system still didn't recover to historic levels under current land use. Okay, so we're talking over time cumulative impacts of the land use there, coupled with what's happened previously with the climate. So there was no recovery, even in the wettest past. So again, there's this sort of notion that when you've got a variable climate that you can't do anything about, what can you do something about? And forestry does not seem to be something that's going to create a resilient future in that area. We don't know if it's going to get wetter or drier. My bet is on drier, but we can't say for sure. But if you've burnt your fingers once, do you really want to burn them again? Then we experimented with plucking 50% of the forestry out under the dryland crop scenario, and we did actually see a positive impact, but it still didn't get to previous levels. But over time, with rainfall events in a wet scenario, it might recover. So the blue line at the top is your lake level sort of recovering under a wet scenario. If it's a dry future, again, your system just bombs out. So a practical recommendation is potentially the phased removal of the plantations, but you can only do that if you have a really tangible economic benefit that people can replace that with, or else you just cannot do it. So now we need partners to help us look at sort of the agricultural potential, the financial potential of cassava, marula. I think people are interested in mango. Commercializing products that people are already using in that area. There's a lot of opportunity with the indigenous species there, lala, monkey orange, that are used for traditional purposes that you could potentially value and upscale. So now we need to work with people who know value chains and markets and value adding. So I've got a whole bunch of practical recommendations, and it's a much longer list than this. But I'll start with individual agency. To address climate change literacy and empower appropriate choices, and in that also get people to avoid living and building in floodplains and building drought resilience. I suspect we need a shift in the way we think, perhaps a social ecological way of thinking with a very, very long-term view. We really need to start avoid working at cross purposes. My key hope is that in an area like this, we can develop a common vision for a sustainable economic future. I've looked at the IDP. It was the very first thing I did when I started working there in 2015. It's a lovely document. Some consultant got a lot of money getting that document there. I haven't seen an ounce of evidence that that document is actually being applied the way it should be, which is why we decided to take a very much bottom-up approach. And I think the next step would then potentially be working with communities from a bottom-up level to get everybody around a table and look at an integrated plan, spatial plan, that everybody agrees to. You've got a common vision. You've got this future-focused, what do we do to make our whole community prosperous? And yeah, I hope the government departments can come together on that. And then communication, a really, really simple one. You guys say, yeah, we'll make our data available on WhatsApp. Guys, they don't have cell phone coverage. There was a massive, you know the storm that went through, where was it, Umlazi, that wind tunnel that just blew everything over. The same thing happened up at Cozy Bay. Nobody knows about it because there was no coverage, because nobody could report it. So we desperately need practical solutions in terms of cell phone coverage, free access to communication channels, basic communication systems that everybody's aware of in place that work through the local indunas, up to the Nkosi, through up to the various municipal structures, and really bridge those gaps. Work with what works on the ground and build on it to close the gaps. Yeah, feasible alternatives to gum, but diversifying income streams. And a key thing for me is what we noticed is people have stopped valuing the grasslands. They were worried about losing their grasslands, but they were prepared to sacrifice them. And the reason is because there's no surface water left. But if you put watering points in for cattle, they would revalue those grasslands. If there was a market for them to access, to sell their crafts and the things that they get off the land, they would revalue those grasslands. So how can we create better value in our in the grasslands? And I can go on and on and on. But yeah, basically these various different levels of responses from individual, village to community, but it needs to be bound by a common vision. So I just want to conclude by saying not only from the work here in Mhlabelangana, but work here in Peak and 100 years of hydrological research in South Africa, every single land management decision is a water resource management decision. Furthermore, impacts on biodiversity have knock-on consequences for a range of life-giving processes, including carbon sequestration into wetlands, people's livelihoods, and so on and so forth. So what we are appealing, and this is our standard message, is to ensure water resilience and livelihoods in a changing climate. We think you need a nexus approach. Don't look at water in isolation to carbon, in isolation to biodiversity, in isolation to social systems. They are a system, and we need to find a way of looking at all of these things in an integrated approach and looking for optimizing system function within that. And I think I've probably run out of time, and that's where I'd like to leave it. And yeah, do we need a common vision? That's it.
Thank you very much for your practical presentation. Colleagues, I'm now looking for the inputs or questions from the two presentations. On my left, I do not recognize a hand. Oh, here is MEC Mayor. On my right, I recognize only one hand. Oh, there are two hands. Oh, there are three hands. Okay. Let me start with MEC Mayor.
No. There we go. Thank you. Premier, I don't know if you're talking about the GPU, if you'd say I'm to the left of the Premier, but thank you, Honourable Premier. And thank you so much for that presentation. And I agree with you fully that I think we are very eThekwini focused when we discuss climate change and the impact of climate change. And we are flood focused. But, you know, as a person responsible for infrastructure, flood damages my infrastructure a lot more than drought does. But it is something we need to look at. And especially in Kanyakure district, you'd be happy to hear that we've just released 20 parcels of land for cell phone towers in the Kanyakure district to improve connectivity, because that is a major part of the problem. And that's something that we are very passionate about as a department as well. But I remain very concerned about a lot that we've heard there. You know, the Kanyakure district, we have I always thought it was the Jozini Dam, but I just read it's actually the Pongola Poort Dam. That I just don't fully understand what the purpose of that dam is. Because the communities around it is not getting water from that dam, and I really do not fully understand why it was built. I know it was built by a government long before ours, but you know, what impact does that dam have on the area? And that's something I wonder about quite a lot, and I think it's something we need to look at. Because, Honourable Premier, I think there is a water use master plan that was adopted by the provincial government in the sixth administration. I do think it's important for us to revisit that water master plan. And I do also think that we have a challenge, and it's something for us to also discuss, is that currently water falls under the mandate of the national government, and then it jumps provincial government and goes to the districts. And I do think there's a gap there that needs to be taken up and discussed on a legislative level and a constitutional level. Because with all due respect to Pretoria, but you can't look at KZN the same way you do about to Gauteng or the Northern Cape or other provinces, because our water situation is like all 9 provinces, very unique. The last question is, and this is a very sensitive one, and I think this is where it's important for us to bring in traditional leadership, and I'm glad to see that there as well. Because the matter of if grassland is so important to us, and I've learned something today, and it's good for us to always one day learn one new thing, my mother always said to me. If grassland is so important to us, then the matter of overgrazing is then a great concern to us. And that's something that I know it's a very sensitive issue, but it's an issue that we then need to really look at and work together with traditional leadership on how do you deal with that. Because that affects water tables, that affects fire, that affects all matters of things. So that's also something that I think at one stage, Honourable Premier, then we need to address here, is the matter of overgrazing and how do we manage that as a provincial government. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ndabezitha.
Asibonge ithuba Ndunankulu. Ngibingelele Ndunankulu. Kuleke kumakhosini akhona MEC abakhona. Engithi nayo yonke nje protocol cela uobserve. Ilokho nje engifisa uku-add mhlambe ku presentation athi khona kusuku. Uthi thina njengamakhosi last week in Ndunankulu we were there in Durban for a week, sitting with SAIG as a judge akhona la KZN, complaining about the fact that we don't have power, especially to call on people who have done something wrong to come to our court or whatever you do when we call that person. We don't have that power. So currently that we on that presentation, it's talking about something like 30,000 hectares of gum trees. Probably as a Marcos, we know about 10,000 hectares of that or less. Is the fact that people are planting and they are continue planting day by day, especially in places where we don't see them. They will just plant. We will try to stop them. They won't do anything. They will just hear you what we are saying, but they will continue to plant. This thing of planting gum trees is a continuous thing every day. Probably that 30,000 is even more than that, because they are planting day by day. So we don't have, I've been sitting with the Department of Water. I told them that we have people who are planting these gum trees. Stop them. They said they can't do anything to them. They don't know how to stop them. So it's a serious issue. It's affecting us as well, because whatever Sue is saying with the science, we're gonna be affected. One day, I told my community that one day everybody will take his push and go and slash these gum trees, because it's gonna affect our water, especially we drink water from boreholes. Most of us in our area don't have water from Maspala. We drink water from boreholes. Once you go to the borehole and drink that water, you find that water there is salty. It will be due to the fact that the water from the sea has gone into the lake and it's gonna communicate the lake. So once the lake has got salty water, even our boreholes will have salt water as well. So gonna be affected in the fact that everybody will go and take the Celemba and slash all these gum trees, because it's gonna be affecting us, especially when we don't have water. Then we are in trouble. If you go to drink water, you find that it's salty, then it's very troublesome. So we have a serious issue with the people who are planting this gum tree. I don't know what to do, Premier, but every course is have got the same problem as I have. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ndabezitha. The next speaker was supposed to be, whose hand was up? I can't see. Oh, Mr. Mtunega.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. As Honourable Premier, and greetings to your good self. The Honourable MEC, Amakosa Sendlunkulu, Abantwana Sendlunkulu. Allow me to stand on the protocol that has already been established. Honourable Speaker, I've been sitting here overwhelmed by the planning because, you know, when it's PCF, we don't say much. On the previous presentations have been covered by the Honourable MEC, Melane Mngadi, and the response by Dr. Matlana on the issue of the coal. Because as it may be appreciated, in our area as we speak, I don't know how many mines are coming in. I'm even having an invitation next week by DMRE on the new mine that is coming to mine the coal. But because that has been dealt with, I've passed on to the integrated spatial planning with a question within me that asks, is it a practical or is it a theoretical concept? Why I'm having that kind of a question? It is because of the role players that have to focus or deal with this issue, primarily being government, traditional leadership, and the community property associations. Why I'm mentioning the latter, Honourable Premier, it is because of the challenges that we are faced with in local government when it comes to community property associations, CPAs. And we've seen a trend where there are even now land warlords that are emerging, threatening that spatial planning or that integrated spatial planning that as government we try to come up with. But most of the time we'll be accusing or we'll be saying it's because of traditional leadership, whereas it's not always the case. The land restitution program, I think we need to review it or relook at it because, again, when those restitution program is implemented in some areas, it is not aligned with the integrated development plan of a municipality. And at the end of the day, when those communities have been settled, they look at nowhere else than at local government to be provided with services. And I think Dr. Mambo earlier on did speak about the challenges, especially of the aging and dilapidated infrastructure. And one has to applaud, of course, the Department of Water and Sanitation and COGTA with the support that they're giving to us at local government. But it's far than what would be expected because the infrastructure that we have as a country, I'm not talking about our municipality, has aged and dilapidated so drastically that you need good investment to replace them. The issue of...
I know that
yes.
You are now, because you are only asking a question, I know that you are wrapping up now.
Thank you, Premier. Yes, I am. I just wanted also to thank Dr. van Rensburg for unraveling the problem that I've been having all along in terms of the tree ecosystem versus the grass ecosystem. And lastly, Premier, because as I'm saying, this integration speaks also of the provision of the services. In terms of the water security that Dr. Mambo spoke about, my concern has always been, are we damming our rivers sufficiently to circumvent challenges that we have with our community in terms of providing those services? I'm raising that question, Honourable Speaker, because in 2023, I read an article that say pre-1994, we had 18 dams that were constructed. But post 1994 to date, only 2 dams in the country have been constructed. This exacerbates the problem of the drought. We have so many rivers in this province that are not being dammed, thus posing a big challenge on municipalities in terms of providing water to their communities. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mcinel. There was the last one. Oh, yes. It's Mr.
Dr. Mazibuko.
Dr. Mazibu.
Thank you very much, Honorable Premier. Mine is directed to Dr. Papa from MUT. Doctor, you highlighted the agreements that you have with a German institution, but you did not expand to your desired outcome and what has been achieved. Like you said, that KZN is one of the most disaster-prone regions, so we need to be ready. One of the major problems we have is the capacity in terms of proper devices and expertise to assist us during the climate crisis and aftermath. Kusenzeka sitholela like KZN abantu begcibeke ngaphansi kwesihlabathi singakwazi ukubathola bengakwazi ukucounteka kwi-disaster. But when I visited NASA in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, I found NASA training universities and other NGOs about the usage of space-based capabilities like your Earth observation and satellite positioning to rescue people that are stuck under rubble or under mud to find those bodies. So now I want to invite you to start bilaterals with such institutions, universities, institutions like CSIR, institutions like South African National Space Agencies, NRF, so that we can get people who can assist us and devices to assist us during climate crisis and aftermath. You can go as far as getting exchange programs in this, and you have people like your retired experts to educate our communities during climate crisis and our response, to come up with climate response solutions. Thank you.
What's happening here? I'm sorry, Dr. Mazibu, I could not capture your point because of a visitor who was just next to me opening a conference in the middle of a very serious input. I'm not quite sure if you can just be concise on what is it that you're checking. I want to capture it here.
Okay. Yes, I was inviting MUT to come up with other with bilaterals with other universities and other organizations like NASA who assist in terms of training universities on how to use Earth or space-based capabilities like Earth observation and satellite communication and satellite positioning in terms of rescuing people or bodies who are covered by rubble or maybe mud. So I wanted them to assist that, even to come up with programs that will see us having exchange programs in KZN and taking advantage of retired experts to educate our communities on climate response solutions. Thanks.
I wonder what's happening now. Thank you very much for all the inputs, which are quite valuable. May I therefore request that we get the responses? Oh, there is a hand now. Oh, Mrs. Ngobo, Apollo.
Thank you, Premier, and your entourage, all the guests that are so important in this workshop, the councils and everybody, all protocol observed. I just want to appreciate everything that has been presented to us so far, but what I am just having in my mind as a concern is what the university, what the universities, or what Mangosuthu University has started to do or has initiated. What if, because I just believe, I don't know, I just believe that capacitating people on all these crises that we have is the main thing. What has been done by Professor also van Rensburg is recommended very much. When you just go to I know I was once a teacher there. It's not a comfortable place to stay. But what you have done, it's very, very important. You see, studying the whole area very patiently. I remember in 1994 or 1995, there was pneumonia in that area, which killed many people. And it was not only the rain, but it was also the problem of the Jozini Dam. You are talking about the scarcity of water in that area. I haven't heard you mentioning the utilization of the Jozini Dam. But instead of when it is full to its capacity and then it's opened, just to go down, and then because the land is flat, it just washes everybody away. It was just a painful thing. But I just feel like if there could be a system that you can have in order to utilize that water for the people of Mkhanyabude to get assistance in planting something else different from what you have been saying. It's plant murderers like Mbulalazo and whatever what you have been saying. It was just like that. I just wanted to make that comment only. Thank you very much.
Thank you. May I therefore invite Ms. van Rensburg and also Dr. Bauer to respond to the questions or comment on the inputs.
Okay, I'll respond to the.
Can I allocate time?
Yes, sure.
Each one is allocated 3 minutes.
3, okay. So with respect to Josini Dam, it was, as far as I'm aware, constructed to support agriculture and community water delivery, mainly in the Mkuzi area. From what I understand, there's a lot of irrigation happening, drawing water from that dam. My proposal is there's a serious review of those licenses. It is in the DWS plan that we should and can review licenses to redress equity issues. It is a sensitive issue up there, but there could be something done there. Currently, as I understand, there's no available water for release. In terms of just also on Josini with the release, so that floodplain, the Pongola floodplain, used to flood fairly regularly. Now people, because it's dry, have moved in. So again, there's this issue throughout KZN where when it's dry, people move into floodplains, and then when you have a natural flooding event, you see a lot of catastrophic disaster. But Des Moines was a very, very freak event that was, it was an unusual cyclone that came in. But that area is prone to cyclones, and that kind of rainfall is needed, but Des Moines was exceptional, so it wiped out a lot of KZN. And they do have a very, very careful release strategy for that dam and a clear communication strategy when they do release. They have to release in terms of the ecological reserve to maintain the processes there. Just in terms of the overgrazing, I think that's your least of your problems. The issue is the land transformation, which is reducing the amount of grassland, which increases the pressure on the grassland. What would be lovely is to see if we can't establish some kind of biofuels company. I was wanting to contact my colleague from MUT to say there's a lot of biomass there, indigenous woodies that are encroaching into the grassland. We did take a group of community members, 9 of them, 3 from each community, down to Matatiele to look at the Meet Naturally project, where they've got excellent governance programs going, where the community themselves have self-organized. They're actually managing their cattle commercially. They're selling to mobile auctions. What would need to happen, practical, is we need to reinstitute proper husbandry in that area, cattle and animal husbandry in the area, proper DIPS, veterinary services, state veterinary services, and perhaps look at if the community are wanting it, it's up to whatever decisions the Amakosi make. But if there is a desire for cattle, then we would also need carefully managed plans. But the overgrazing is being precipitated by the fact that you're losing your grasslands primarily to plantations. So it's a systemic issue. So that's why I keep saying you have to look at the whole system and find your leverage points as to, you know, what would need to shift to create a change in value system on the ground. And then I think that was it. So yeah, but there's a huge opportunity for, I don't know if it's possible technologically wise, but for a small biofuels plant there where you're doing bush clearing, alien plant clearing, and utilizing that biomass and trying to restore. There's a lot of money out there for restoration, and there are some projects coming online in that area for trying different restoration techniques. But the bottom line is people need money, and I would recommend looking at a far more diverse service-orientated economy there, and value adding to natural products, rather than trying to scrape a living from what we know is a very substandard agricultural area. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Power, I think for you, because others were just inputs, is the issue of partnership. Any response to that one?
Thank you, Honorable Premier. Just want to thank the colleagues who have intervened in terms of the recommendation, and I thank Dr. Mazibuko for recommendation. And as a university, we are open for partnerships. And the role of a university is to empower people with knowledge that will help them to sustain the issues, socio-economic issues that we're facing. Now, MUT as an academic institution is on that mission, especially that we are situated, I've said it in my introduction, that we are situated in a township. For us, it's a blessing, it's an opportunity. And we are open to any form of collaboration. Coming to the German partners, the German partners, it's just it's an NGO that came to also assist us in the same mission. They want to help us, for us to reach what we've taken as a mission, for us to tackle the issues of climate change in educating the population. And that's the role of the university. It's not only about giving degrees to people, but to empower them and also to enlighten the community in which we find ourselves. Then you are more than welcome. If you want to join us and help us in that journey, our ends are open and our doors are also open. The only challenge we have is the financial resources that we have, because we need to empower as many people as we can, especially the unemployed graduate, which we want to use them as interns, and they can go easily to the community to inform the population, to educate the population. Also, well, resources will be needed for the mentors, the postdoctoral fellows that we have, the academic colleagues and the researchers that are involved. And thank you so much to the sister as well for the intervention. It's well appreciated. Thank you.
Well, Thank you. We have come to a point wherein we have to take lunch. The time now is 3 minutes to 1. If we can take an hour for lunch as per the program, we'll come back at not necessarily an hour, 50 minutes, and we'll come back at 10 to 2. At least we're on time, we're ahead of time. The venues for lunch, in Mkanyagute boardroom, members of the Executive Council, the mayors, Amakhosi, will use that venue. Otherwise, it's not big enough to accommodate all of us. As a result, there is another main dining hall across where all the delegates will get a lunch. Good news, which are breaking news, is that there was a case of Itala Bank in courts wherein the Prudential Authority and the Repayment Authority lost previously, that they should have not in fact taken over the operations of Itala in terms of the law. They appealed the decision, they've lost again. We are hopeful that Itala Bank might go back to its operation, though there will be restrictions. So that are the breaking news which are good. And the note I've received is that they cannot appeal again now. Can we close our eyes so that we bless food? Heavenly Father, Almighty Lord, we thank you for the food that you have provided for us. Please bless it so that it keeps us healthy. In Jesus' name, amen. May you enjoy your lunch.